Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alamin, salatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya wal mursalin, amma ba'd. This class is just in case there's anyone new on here. I don't think there is. In this class, we go through the Qasida Munfarijah, which is the poem of deliverance. And last week, the verse that we finished on was where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَنْ يَتَّقِ اللَّهَ يَجْعَلْ لَهُ مَخْرَجًا. Whoever has taqwa, is aware of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, has aware of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's influence on their life, which is taqwa. If you're vigilant of God, then Allah will create for us a makhraj. A makhraj is an outlet, a way out, some sort of respite. وَيَرْزُقْهُ مِنْ حَيْثُ لَا يَحْتَسِبْ. And Allah gives rizq from where we don't expect it. And وَمَن يَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى اللَّهِ فَهُوَ حَسْبُهُ. And Allah says, whoever has tawakkul, reliance on Allah, that Allah will always be sufficient for him. So the Quran tells us that Allah did not intend to Allah does not want for us to be in hardship. Allah does not want for us to be in hardship. But it also says that when we are in hardship, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will lift that hardship for us. Yeah. So we know a priori that hardship exists. We all face some sort of difficulty in life. So it can't be that Allah meant by this verse that Allah, when Allah says in the Quran, He doesn't intend for us to have to have any difficulty. It can't mean by that we will never experience difficulty. It has to mean something else. So the commentators explaining that say that the one who creates the difficulty also creates the ease, creates the way out. And also it tells us that difficulty is not an ends in itself. It's a means to an ends. Yeah. So hardship is a means to an ends. And the hadith tells us what that ends is, that for every difficulty that we bear, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala removes and He expiates our sins through those difficulties. So this next verse, the Shaykh says, فَلَرُبَّ تَمَافَضَ الْمَحْيَا بِبُحُورِ الْمَوْجِ مِنَ اللُّجَجِ. فَلَرُبَّ تَمَافَضَ الْمَحْيَا بِبُحُورِ الْمَوْجِ مِنَ اللُّجَجِ. And this verse I've called the kind of the birth pangs of life, because he uses this metaphor of difficulty and the blessings that we sometimes don't see being around us if we pay attention, and they are what revives us and gives us life to carry on. And here he continues this metaphor, فَلَرُبَّ تَمَافَضَ الْمَحْيَا. And sometimes life comes forth, فَلَرُبَّ تَمَافَضَ الْمَحْيَا. And sometimes life comes forth بِبُحُورِ الْمَوْجِ مِنَ اللُّجَجِ. With oceans that are teeming, that started out as waves, with oceans that are teeming that started out as waves. So the lesson here is that hardship is part and parcel of the package that we're given. Hardship is just part of the package that we experience, because in order for us to experience highs in life and to appreciate them, we have to also experience some of those difficulties. So hardships are difficult to bear, but they also enhance our appreciation of the good times. And we have more good times than we have difficulties. And if you think that that's not true, then maybe I would say for most people, we're just not paying attention. We're just not paying attention, because there's a lot of good things in our life. If there's people out there with very little by way of wealth, by way of knowledge, and yet they're completely happy, completely content. Many of our grandparents would have, for those who are second generation, third generation, our grandparents, great grandparents then would have grown up in villages with not much knowledge. They didn't really know the ins and outs of the kind of the fiqh questions that are thrown about these days. They didn't have time to debate over what's a bid'ah and what's not a bid'ah. They didn't have to the luxury of do I choose to read my Qiyamul Layl, or do I not? They didn't have these luxuries. For them, these were practical ways of living. They just did it. Qiyamul Layl was an option if you didn't work in the fields all day and your body was aching. Um, for those who were told to, they just got on with it and did it. They didn't ask for the dalil for Qiyamul Layl, they just did it. So many of our grandparents, great grandparents, did these things without ever questioning what the evidence for it is and whether it's valid or not. So there's almost a lot of information out there, a lot of knowledge that makes us very complacent. Yet there are people that are generations before us that didn't have much knowledge, but what they had, they really acted upon, and that was just the norm for them. Knowledge only ever theory. The concept of theoretical knowledge doesn't really mean anything to them. For them, if you learn something, well, you just do it. You just practice it. You go to the imam and say, how many rak'ahs do I read for such and such prayer? And the imam tells you, you don't then start quizzing them on it. You just go away and do it. And then one day you come across a problem that you can't really work out, and you go back to the imam and he gives you an answer, and then you go and practice it again. It's just constantly, this is that sort of relationship. And what that meant was that their faith was very strong, because they never had the luxury of reflecting and thinking about these things, almost to the point where it's nonsensical and irrelevant. It's when we enter this phase of kind of irrelevantly wondering about, reflecting on things that are meaningless, tangibly meaningless. When we have that sort of time in our hands is when we start questioning things that we should never really ever question. So we have all the knowledge in the world today. We have all the access in the world that anyone, regardless of who you are, can pick up your phone now, providing you can tap in some language, English or whatever it is your mother tongue is. If you can tap into Google, then you can get an answer to pretty much any question that you have, literally anything. It could be a medical question, it could be anything question. It may not be the right answer, but it'll be a satisfactory answer for you. We can easily get that. But yet the more information that's out there, the less willing we are to accept it. So if I go onto Google and find overwhelmingly everyone says the same thing, then that gives me the satisfaction that it may be the right answer. But there's 300 pages to scroll through Google, and I'm only going to look at the first page, which means there's not 299 pages of doubt that are still there. Which would never have been if I went to a scholar and I just asked him the question and he gave me a flat out answer. And I trusted and I had faith in him or her, and I just asked them that question rather than going to 29 people or 30 people, because that becomes problematic. So there's lots and lots of questions that people have, and lots of opportunity to get those answered, and yet the level of iman, the level of trust, the level of reliance on people has diminished significantly. That's not just in terms of Islamic knowledge. That's even to the point where we have people going in to see their doctor, and rather than describing their symptoms, they are asking for a particular medication that they expect to be given. And that's because they've been Googling or whatnot. Everyone has been kind of mobilized and has been armed to self-diagnose. And the only reason why we go to a doctor now, for a lot of people, not me definitely, but for a lot of people, the only reason they go to the doctor is because they can't self-prescribe. But if they could, they probably would. And also they go to the doctor just for confirmation, in some cases, not in all cases. But it's interesting how the level of information accessibility has increased, and yet the level of yaqeen, of certitude, of just being tranquil and at peace has reduced significantly. The Sheikh is saying that, look, hardship is a part of the package, difficulty is a part of the package, and when difficulty comes, that we start to appreciate when things are good, things are easy. And also the fact that it will come to pass regardless. You can't necessarily control certain things. There's some things that you can control in your life. For example, you can put yourself in the firing line for some hardships if you so want to. If there are certain things that you can nip at the bud before you ever get there, and that's a complete personal volition choice that we decide to go down those paths. So if someone decides to invest all their life savings into something, but without fully thinking through the ramifications of that, but being just being dazzled by the potential figures of how much money they can make, rather than thinking about the fact that they can't sustain themselves without the money that they've already got, then you are bringing that on yourself. That's something within our control. And that's not to say we rub it in somebody's face if they do something like that, but just there are certain difficulties that we give a leg up to, and there are other difficulties that we have no control over, and that is things like death. We have some control over how we live our lives, and how our loved ones and people that we care about live their lives. In that sense, we have some control in that we can encourage them to eat healthy. We can encourage them to get a bit of exercise, and all of these things that help you become physically healthier, and also mentally healthier, which means that hopefully they're around for longer. So these things we do have a bit of control over, but ultimately we can't control who lives and who dies, and we can't control who lives and dies first or last. That's something we have no control over. So therefore, there are certain hardships in life that we can do nothing about. Like another one is like having children. There are some people that don't particularly want to have children, and yet God gives them children. And for other people, they try for years on end, desperately they want children, and yet they don't have children. Allah doesn't grant them that particular wish. And that for them is very difficult to bear, very hard to bear. And there are outlets there. There's adoption and things like that they can go to, but nonetheless, it's a very difficult personal struggle for both the man and the woman. This idea of letting each other down, especially if both or one spouse really wants the child, or even about personally whether one feels like, if as a man, is it my fault, and start kind of blaming yourself. So these are all difficulties that someone can face that you in some cases have no control over. So these difficulties will come to pass regardless. They will happen if they are supposed to happen. As Ibn Ata'illah says, he says, anyone who, if there's he says, "Oh my Lord, oh Allah," he says, how is it that anything that was to never strike me, how can it ever strike me? And how is it that anything that was supposed to strike me ever missed me? Yeah. He says, addressing Allah, he says, it's a complete subservience and submission to God to say, I have no doubt that if something ever afflicts me, then it was always supposed to afflict me. And if anything doesn't afflict me, then it was never supposed to afflict me. That's like the highest form of pure subservience and acceptance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's decree. So these things will come to pass. So the only real question is, how do we deal with it? It's not whether it will be or whether it will not be, but how will we deal with it? And what is our state as we go through these difficulties? And that's what the last couplet was. The last couplet was about. It says, وَلَهَا أَرَجٌ مُحْيٍ أَبَدًا فَاقْصُدْ مَحْيَا ذَاكَ الْأَرَجِ. This idea that we should look for the blessings that are within that calamity, within that difficulty. So if somebody can't have children, but they should think about the life that they're living, the luxuries that they have in that life. And it may not replace fully their heart's desire, but nonetheless, there are many people out there that don't have those luxuries. So it may be not enough for them, but actually if they stop and think, there are people that don't have shelter, they don't have a place to sleep. I saw a video a day or two ago, a charity that was set up for imams that are financially struggling. And this particular video was in, I think it was in Africa, South Africa. And the imam, Allah bless him, was describing how, he was, every Eid, he does all he can for his community, but nobody ever thinks about whether he financially is able to, if he's doing all right or not, because people just assume he is. So everybody's going to him, asking him questions about, their personal difficulties, asking him to make dua because they're having, going through some sort of hardship or whatever it might be. And he's sharing with this charity that I think he was either he set up or he's a part of now. And he's sharing how, he's going through the whole day answering people's questions, helping them, making dua for them, but nobody asks whether he's got enough money to take home. And he breaks down while he's describing this, and he says how, you know, there was an Eid where he didn't have enough. I think he says he didn't have enough money to buy new clothes for his children, or something, or to give it, you know, the money that you give for Eid to his children, which is really powerful. As I was listening to it, to think, you know what, there's a lot of people out there that go through these sorts of difficulties that we never really. It's very easy at face value to just assume people are okay, but you know, sometimes people are not, and that for me was a bit of an eye opener, and how firstly, I, you know, how honest he was and how open he was, which is just really powerful to listen to. In fact, if some of the students remind me that we're on a WhatsApp group, I'll share that video actually, because I thought it was really, it's worth listening. And I don't know anything about this charity, but you know, if people can support it, inshallah, then please do. So yeah, so the idea behind this charity was to support imams internationally who are financially struggling. And I remember years ago there was an article that we what was it called? It was called "Who Watches the Watchmen?" Who watches the Watchmen? Meaning the Watchmen are, for those of you familiar with comics will know where the Watchmen reference comes from. But the idea that there are people out there that look after the community, but then who looks after them? Yeah, who looks after them, sort of thing. So it's going back to the point where you have somebody who is you know, who really wants to have a child and doesn't have a child, but yet they have a successful career. They might be blinded by this, the fact that they want this child so much. They would be adamant that they'd give up anything in life, including their career, including their house. They'll give anything up to have that one thing, and I'm sure that's true. You know, it's not to question whether that's true or not, but it's very easy to forget how much of a blessing each of those things are. And to appreciate them, you have to just look down the road, or to look at somebody else who doesn't have those things, somebody who has to work all hours of the day, multiple jobs in some cases, just to be able to put food on the table, to be able to pay the rent, or whatever it is that person you know, needs to get through, or to look after their family members, or look after their parents or grandparents, or whoever, whatever it is that person is going through. It's very easy to be blinded by that, because we're so consumed by the one thing that we can't have. And it's as though God is saying that I give you all of this, and the one thing that I hold back, and you forget me over it. You deny every one of my blessings because I hold one thing back from you. You know, because the alternative, if you really think about it, the alternative is, and this is an extreme case. I'm looking at extremes here, so I'm certainly not saying everybody's like this, but just as a point of reflection, sometimes it's good to take extremes, because it gets us to find us a balance. But then there are people in other parts of the world who have children, but each time they have a child, they almost resign to the fact that child probably won't make it to adulthood. And the reason why that won't happen is because they don't have enough food, they don't have enough money to do that. So where you have people who have no money, they have no shelter, they have no water, clean water, they have no homes, no families to look after them, to support them, no jobs. They have none of those things. And yet the only way they can get those homes, those that shelter, that safety, is by marriage. And what marriage brings is you know, is children. And then sometimes hardship. You know, not every government, every country has the kind of welfare system that we have here, which means overnight the situation can change. So it's important for us to try to gain perspective, whatever difficulty we're going through, whatever it is that we don't have. Just think about the things you do have, and ask yourself. It may be easy to tell yourself you would give all of those up for that one thing you didn't have, but actually, what would the world look like if that were to be true? Because that itself will bring with it many hardships. He says sometimes life you know, comes forth with teeming oceans that start off as waves. The metaphor that he's using, the imagery that he's creating, is this idea that he uses the waves and life as the two kind of metaphors here, and it's a continuing metaphor, because early on he talked about the night sky, he talked about the idea of the clouds and how they bring down blessing, which is the rain, and then the rain leads to this to water, to oceans, and oceans have waves. So he's continuing this metaphor, and now taking this metaphor, he's saying your hardship, what you're feeling, how you are, is he says it's like you're at the bottom of a valley, right? So when you are at your lowest point, psychologically, it's like physically being at the bottom of a valley, because when the ocean comes, when the river comes, when the rains come, the first thing that they immerse is the valley. The first thing they immerse is the valley. So in order to benefit from these waves, these oceans, he's saying you have to be at the lowest point, right? And the lower you are, the more you're immersed by the ni'am of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is the waves. And then when that water completely overwhelms or overtakes you, what happens? The valley disappears. The valley disappears, and that blessing takes you to perfectly in line with the earth itself, meaning the flat land above that valley. So the river flows in line with the valley. It's as though the hardship was needed for you to be struck by this blessing, but when the blessing comes, it completely revitalizes you and brings you back to the point you need to be, so that you're on that plane. Yeah. And in that previous lesson, we also talked about this idea of araj, yeah, muhyin abadan, he says, and he said, faqsud mahya dhaka al-araji. He says, look for that blessing, and he talks about it as this blessing that's rising through the time, and the place of that blessing is rising through in this hardship. So this idea of blessings rising upwards and hardship being something that keeps you, keeping you down. So that's the metaphor that he's kind of giving us here. In the verse of Quran, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I started this lesson by saying, look, hardships are a part of life, they do come. The Quran tells us what that purpose is. I mentioned the purpose is ultimately to expiate our sins, but equally there are some people that won't benefit from that. أحسب الناس أن يتركوا أن يقولوا آمنا وهم لا يفتنون. أحسب الناس, do people think that they will be left to simply say, I believe in God? That you'll simply be left to say, I believe in God, وهم لا يفتنون, and yet you'll never be tested. Yeah. So do we think that God has just put us on this earth and gave us the tawfiq to say we believe, and yet not divide us between those who believe it, truly believe it, and those who just say they believe it? Yeah. So أيحسب الناس أن يتركوا أن يقولوا آمنا وهم لا يفتنون. Do people think that they will be left on this earth without being tested, as to whether their faith is true or not? So what that tells us is then the hardship is a test of faith. And the final point I want to make on this couplet, there's a lot to say actually. I've got a few notes on this, but I'm just going to the consolidation here. Is that ultimately, when we go through difficulty, we have to accept, we have to know that everything is from God, that everything is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that ultimately, therefore, must be for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's from God, it's for God, and therefore, everything that situation must ultimately take us to God. Yeah, that's really the cycle of these sorts of things. That ultimately the hardship comes from God, and it's there so that for God, in that it ultimately takes us to God. That should be the cycle of difficulty, and that's why the Shaykh, his next couplet, he says, "Wal khalqu jami'an fi yadihi, fadhawu sa'atin wa dhawu haraji." Is this reminder that we ultimately belong to God, and that everything in this world, all the good, the bad, everything that's created in this world ultimately came from God. So if we're going to blame God for the hardships, we should equally blame him for all the great blessings that he's put in our life. And if we're not going to blame God for those blessings, then we shouldn't equally blame him for the hardship. But we have to ask, what is the function of the good things in our life? Why do they exist? Why did God give me those good things? And likewise, you should ask the same thing about the hardships. Or if you're not going to ask about why you're deserving of the good things in life, then maybe don't ask about the hardships either. So one comes with the other. It's a package deal. وَالْخَلْقُ جَمِيعًا فِي يَدِهِ, that all creation is in his hand, belongs to him subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَذَوُ سَعَةٍ, and he is the one who possesses sa'a, which means ease. Yeah, it's where it's to not feel constricted. وَذَوُ haraji, and he possesses all constriction, meaning if it's in his hand whether you go through ease or whether you go through difficulty. So those states are, what is the sa'a and the haraj? Well, it can be, for example, sa'a, your time of sa'a, of ease, is when you have money, when you're feeling comfortable financially, and your do haraj, your time of difficulty, constriction, is when you are not financially comfortable, and or it could be people who are rich and people who are in poverty. People who have knowledge and people who are ignorant is a type of sa'a and type of haraj. Having status and feeling and not having status, so having some sort of rank, whatever that might be, is a type of sa'a from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a great ni'mah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah says, tu'til mulk man tasha wa tudhillu man tasha, tudhillu man tasha, wa ta'izzu man tasha. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that he is the one who grants all dominion. And oh Allah, you are the one that raises people and you're the one who debases people. Yeah. And that's also related to respect. Some people have respect, that's your type of time of sa'a, and sometimes you don't have respect, you're in a kind of a state of some sort of humiliation. In so whatever aspect of your life, it may be that you just feel humiliated about something. These are all kind of the ebbs and flows of life. These things are very natural. It's things that we all accept when we theorize about them. But when we go through the difficulty, then it's hard to put them into perspective, because it's not like you have a timeline of all your life kind of running through you, where you can clearly see that this is just a blip in your existence. What happens is that blip just completely shuts the system down, whereby it becomes the only thing that you've ever faced, are facing, or ever will face. That's the hardest thing about difficulty. It's not knowing that it'll come to an end. If someone could say, whatever pain you're feeling right now, in exactly 15 days, that pain would be half the pain it is now, and exactly 6 months, this pain that you're feeling right now, you'll look back and you'll actually be grateful. If someone can give that sort of timeline, then I'm sure people will feel a lot more comfortable. But that's not the nature of how things work. And I remember one of my previous classes, I talked a bit about this, actually, this idea that does knowing everything, does knowing these things make life easier? When it comes to hardship, we may think just in that instance. So what I just said there, which is, if someone could say when the pain will shut off, then it will make life easier. But actually, if you think of it all as a package deal, then that also means knowing that there's a pain coming. So how would one feel if you knew that there is a extreme hardship that's going to come to you in 6 months' time, right? The thought of it is probably going to be far worse than going through it. So what ends up happening is that pain is doubled, trebled, because now not only are you experiencing it for the 2 or 3 months that you experience it, but you spend 6 months dreading it, where it just became this monster that you couldn't overcome, and then life just shut down. And then when it did come to pass, it was just it just took you even further down, where there's almost no climbing out of it. So it's a great ni'mah of Allah that we don't know these things, that we don't know exactly when we're going to die, because we might assume that our life will become extremely efficient, but actually that might not happen. What may happen is that for many of us, we'll just shut down. we'll just shut down, or at least it'll become so predictable in terms of how we are. Just imagine how, if that decision making process of God was loosely speaking, if that was all visible to us, then it would be it would just take out all the enjoyment in life, not just the hardship in life. Just imagine how a conversation would go with somebody. Just imagine if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave you the tawfiq to see into the future in that way, where somebody speaks to you and you already know what they're going to say. Imagine all the fun and the great things that we have in life, the conversations that you have with your friends. How meaningless do they become if you already know what everyone thinks? And then what kind of friendships would you have if you really knew what your friends momentarily thought of you? Yeah, because that's the other thing. Everyone at some point about somebody has had a feeling about them that's some irritation towards them, and it may be something that's really close to you, somebody you absolutely love, but there's a moment when you were irritated with them, and it's an irritation that was really intense, but it was momentary, meaning it passed, and you would not even, it didn't change you in any way, it didn't affect you in any way, it just was, and it happens maybe every now and again. If I was that person you were irritated with, and I could see that irritation in the moment that it happened, if I could know that you thought it, I can't see anything else. All I see is that you have this irritation with me. And so imagine the ill feelings that I may harbor towards you. And then that just all the fun in life and the meaning of life would disappear in that moment. Everything would just be would just be flattened. Like nothing would mean anything anymore, because every thought, even the idea of falling in love or loving somebody or enjoying somebody's company, all of these things would just would be gone. So it's a package deal that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he has not given us, he's taken away that sort of skill, which is well within with the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us, but he didn't give that to us. And that's meant that there's been times when I want to know what people think, I want to know what's in somebody's heart. But actually, when I weigh it all up, I'm glad I don't know, because there's far more harm that comes from something like that than it is any gain. In the context of hardships, when you're in a hardship, it may be that you just want to know when it will end, but actually, having that sort of knowledge is an extreme. It's not a gift. That's a curse. That can be a curse, and actually, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not giving that to us, allowing us to go through it, is a blessing itself from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that he didn't give us that. Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, it's mentioned that he used to be able to see whenever someone did wudu, he could see the sins of those people on the water that come off their body. They say he used to not look at people when they're doing wudu, because every time they'd wash water on them, because there's a hadith about water being wudu being a form of purification from sin, that he could physically see it. And they say that he made a dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that he took that away from him, because he just couldn't cope with it anymore. He did not want to see people's sins. Now, Allahu alam how true it is, an anecdote about him, but it's mentioned by some of his biographers that this was an ability that he had, and he made dua to Allah that he took that sight away from him. If Allah has given somebody the gift of that, then that's between them and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it would be a gift to somebody who can cope with all the difficulty that brings with it. But it's certainly not something that we should be celebrating, embracing, or encouraging, because it's not something that's it's not as luxurious as it might sound. If you want something that's going to create that moment, that sense of urgency inside you to do good, then guess what? God can see inside your hearts. God actually can see inside your heart. So don't worry about the sheikh, worry about God, because God's going to take his there'll be a divine reckoning, and on that reckoning there will be a hisab, and that hisab, the good deeds and the bad deeds will all be added up, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that he will see the through our spiritual hearts. He will see those that are sound hearts and those that are blemished hearts and those that are black hearts. He will see all of those things. So if anything is going to give us a spiritual motivation, it should be that God can see God can see inside our hearts. But yet this mindset tends to be more about the sheikh will have this veil, and in this veil he will take me to paradise, and he'll protect me, and all of these things have um, um, they have lots of spiritual currency within that world, where the shuyukh will talk about these things. But in practice, nobody, let me tell you, nobody is going to carry your good deeds for you except the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. If anyone's going to absorb your pain, it will be the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Other than that, there's no point, because the Quran tells us, يَوْمَ يَفِرُّ الْمَرْءُ مِنْ أَخِيهِ وَأُمِّهِ وَأَبِيهِ. The Quran tells us that on that day, every man will run from his own children, his own spouse, everyone around him. That's when the Quran tells us that, it's telling us that the people that are closest to us, the people that we rely most on, will run from us, and they'll all be shouting nafsi nafsi. Every single being will say nafsi nafsi. And the hadith of tawassul tells us of the shafa'a, that people will go to every single prophet, and each of them will say, this is the reason why I don't feel like I can go to God and ask for the beginning of the reckoning. So the first great intercession will be the intercession of the prophets, so that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins the judgment, because people will be so desperate at that point that they just want the judgment to happen. And each of them will say, I'm not the person to start it. And each of them will give a reason why. And it will only be the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the hadith tells us that when they go to the Prophet, he'll say, Ishfa, he'll go to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he will ask, and Allah will say, Ishfa to shafa, seek and you will be granted. And that's a rank that's given to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And it's a rank that nobody can take away from him. That's not to say that our connections with our teachers and our shuyukh and our elders and our loved ones is not going to benefit. Of course, it'll benefit us. It'll benefit us insofar as it's helped us maintain that pure heart. It'll benefit us insofar as we go to God with a as clean a sheet as possible. That's the aim. Suhbah is one of the best ways that you can purify yourself. Hands down, it's one of the best ways you can do it. It's probably the best way to do it. The first is, I would say, no, in fact, suhbah is the best way. And the other is knowledge. Yes, suhbah and knowledge, because knowledge will give you something to focus on that will take you away from distractions in life. Knowledge is something that if you learn about Islam, you'll become so immersed in it. If you truly do take pleasure in it, you'll be so immersed in it, you won't have time for a lot of the frivolous stuff that will waste time, and you'll constantly be thinking about it. And it's the best form of distraction from the dunya that is a distraction. And it's the easiest because it has these quick gains of you constantly learning. So you're kind of feeding a bit of everything. You're giving your body some sustenance, but you're also giving your soul sustenance, and it hopefully should slowly kind of take you to God, kicking and screaming, but it will take you to God. But suhbah is the easiest, being around people who remind you of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, being around people who will remind you. That's why some of the awliya, they don't even say suhbah, they say mahabba. They say love is the best way to God, because if you want to love God, be around people who love God, and your love for them will increase your love of God. It's just the way of, it's the sunnah of existence. That's how things work. You love everything that you love everything that your loved ones love. It's just something that it's kind of built inside us. That's something that we just we can't get past. So if you are if my son or daughter draws something, I'm interested, and it invokes a feeling inside me just because it was drawn by them. Yes, that connection to them is what makes that thing meaningful. So some of them say that love is the connection, and therefore the sheikh has a really important role in that, because the sheikh, what he does is he creates this this object of love, right? He becomes the object of love, and through him hopefully directs you towards God. So from that perspective, it's very beneficial. That I wanted to say that, because I don't want to dismiss the idea of having a sheikh and loving a sheikh, and these are extremely important. What I'm doing is I'm trying to make sure that we're clear as to what's important here. What is the important thing here? The important thing here is the idea of loving somebody that ultimately reminds you of God and can take you to God. But all the other things that are attached to it, this idea that the shaykh can see inside your heart, the shaykh can fly, walk on water, and do the moonwalk, whatever else it is that apparently the shaykh can do. These sorts of things are often mythical, often adages that people just like to think about their shaykh. And the reason why I'm very much against it is because they're dangerous. They're dangerous because what they do is anybody who is on the fence about belief, when they hear things like that, it pushes them off the edge. It pushes them off the edge. People who are already inclined towards that thing, it kind of just increases them in that mystical connection, and they love it. That's fine. It'll keep them busy. But actually, the people who are important are the people who are on edge, who are looking for God but just not finding any way to Him. For them to start hearing these sorts of flamboyant stories isn't necessarily very, it's not necessarily useful for them. Yeah, and it's actually quite dangerous. So that's why I guess that was why I'm making that point. So to summarize this, then what we need to do is we need to shift our focus away from this changing landscape of hardship and ease, hardship and ease, hardship and ease, and start focusing on the one who kind of cultivated it and created it in the first place. We have to turn our attention towards God. The only constant in our life is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What we've got to do is try to the best of our abilities, try and focus on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Tabarak alladhi biyadihi al-mulk wa huwa ala kulli shay'in qadir. The Surah Mulk, the opening line, which is, and Surah Mulk, by the way, every Friday one should make an effort to read it. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam called it al-Munjiyah, the surah that is protects us in the grave from the punishment of the grave. So it's called al-Munjiyah, or Surah al-Mulk. You should read it, or try to read it every Friday if possible. The opening lines of that, Tabarak alladhi biyadihi al-mulk wa huwa ala kulli shay'in qadir, that glory be to Allah, in His hand is all dominion, yeah, and He is qadir over all things, meaning everything that happens, fadawu sa'atin wa dawu haraji. So we need to try our best to kind of direct ourselves towards Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. The first couplet, فَلَرُبَّ تَمَا فَاضَ الْمَحْيَا بِبُحُورِ الْمَوْجِ مِنَ اللُّجَجِ, is that I've called it the birth pangs of life, or oceans from waves, is what it's probably what it really is. And he says this idea. So that first couplet, so I've done two couplets so far. This first couplet is that that you have to be, sometimes you have to experience, you have to be at the bottom of the valley in order to make full benefit of the river when it flows, because it carries you to the top. And that river is the blessings that come and hit you when you least expect them, and they take you right up to the surface. And I've called it the birth pangs because the other thing that the waves have, again continuing his style of metaphor, is that waves are seen as being destructive, right? So waves have kind of a very mixed, I suppose, we have a mixed perception of them. On the one hand, waves from a distance are just a sign of life. When you hear waves crashing into the ocean, it's a sign of just all the life that's in those oceans, yeah. But equally, waves can be destructive, right? So waves can be destructive, but that's how they create life. That's how they create life. It's actually the waves crashing into the ocean that kind of that almost awakens it, and it breaks through that land, and that land spreads. That's how. In fact, there are opinions that say that's exactly how land was divided. It was the crashing of those waves. Also, it's through the waves that certain animals, certain fish, certain bacteria, all of these things kind of move from one part of the earth to another part of the earth to kind of seeds and things like that within the ocean floor that moves across the ocean and gives life to the ocean. So what appears to be crashing into the ocean in an uncontrolled way is actually the birth pangs of more life. Yeah. And there's a saying amongst the Arabs, إِنَّمَا السَّيْلُ اجْتِمَاعُ النُّقَطِ, that what is an ocean, what is a wave but a collection of drops. Yeah. What is a wave but a collection of drops? In other words, that if you think about a wave as just being this, so a wave in this case would be like this, all the blessings in our life, right? All the blessings in life that come and strike us and awaken us and remind us that there's there's a life yet to be lived, yeah, not just be immersed in hardship. But actually, it says, what are these blessings? This one great wave of a blessing is actually a collection of really small blessings, really tiny droplets of blessings that are in our life, that in themselves are, to us meaningless, that we don't even think about, we don't question, we don't even think about. But yet collectively, it's when they turn into when they turn into a wave and they strike us, that's when we begin to, that's when we see them. So it's this, what he's telling us is that pay attention to those small things, pay attention to the small details, the droplets of the blessings, the tawfiq that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put into our lives. Don't wait for it to turn into this wave that crashes on you, and don't expect it to be a wave that crashes on you. Rather, look at each of these things, and when you open up your kind of sight to all of those possibilities of all the good things that are happening in your life, you will see a wave. You won't see lots of individual isolated good things in your life. What you'll see is a collection of good things, and you will subconsciously weigh it all up, and you begin to appreciate that actually life isn't that bad. Things are going well for me. People who go through depression, the hardest thing with depression is people, they're just not able to see the good things in their life. That's the hardest thing. And I'm talking about even clinical depression. I'm not saying that you can just tell them to look at them. I'm not saying that at all, because that is clearly there must be some sort of chemical imbalance there. That's why it's called clinical depression. So there are certain chemical imbalances that can lead to that. But I suppose for our purposes, we should be thinking about it. Not being able to see good things in your life at its extreme has a clinical presentation. And at its extreme, it can lead to all sorts of difficulties. It can lead to people taking their own life because they're just not able to see any meaning in it anymore. And if you've ever spoken to somebody with clinical depression, some of them will tell you that I know that I've got good things in my life. I know that I've got children, I've got grandchildren. I know all of that's there. I don't know what it is. When people are telling you these sorts of things, it's a great ni'mah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for all of us that we're able to see those things and appreciate them, and to be able to see that, you have to just speak to somebody who just isn't, and they have some of the all sorts of good things in their life that they can describe, but yet they can't emotionally connect to for whatever reason. And obviously, if somebody's going through that, then it's the right time to go and speak to your doctor to get a bit more help with that. And the second couplet that I touched on, because I don't want to spend too much time on it, and I've slowed down because I've got so many notes that I'm just moving through just so that I don't have to cover it all. With the second one was الخلق جميعا في يده فذو سعة وذو حرج, and this is about control and reliance. So this couplet is, the theme of this is complete acceptance, reliance, and relinquishing control. Therefore, all of this is to Allah, from Allah, and for Allah. That's everything. Ultimately, is going back to God, and that's why if you look at the verse on sabr, Allah says, "Inna Allah ma'a sabirin." He says, وَلْنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِنَ الْخَوْفِ وَالْجُوعِ وَنَقْصٍ مِنَ الْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَنْفُسِ وَالثَّمَرَاتِ وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ الَّذِينَ هُمْ إِذَا أَصَابَتْهُمْ مُصِيبَةٌ قَالُوا إِنَّا لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ راجعون. It's the greatest kind of manifestation of patience is the acceptance that inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un, that to Allah we belong and to Him we shall return. So to believe that everything that you have, whatever ni'mah you have from God, is from God and it belongs to God. And it's not just that you should look at it like a gift, you should look at it like a amana, like a trust, that it's not permanently yours, it's not something for us to keep, it's a keepsake. It's something that you hold on to, but eventually you return it back to its true owner, who's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The eighth couplet overall, so the third couplet for today, but the eighth couplet overall is about purpose. وَنُزُولُهُمُ وَطُلُوعُهُمُ فَعَلَى دَرَكٍ وَعَلَى دَرَجٍ وَنُزُولُهُمُ وَطُلُوعُهُمُ فَعَلَى دَرَكٍ وَعَلَى دَرَجٍ. He says, and being afflicted, yeah, وَنُزُولُهُمُ وَطُلُوعُهُمُ, or you could also say, and you being elevated or you being brought down, right? So this is either the affliction, whether you have an affliction or whether you have you're in a time of ease, so in time of hardship or in a time of ease. Or another way of looking at it is whether you yourself are feeling, whether you're being whether you feel elevated by it, meaning you feel spiritually close to God, or you feel spiritually distant from God. He says فَعَلَى دَرَكٍ وَعَلَى دَرَجِ. He says then this is either going to be your fall, yeah, ala darakin, from the, there's a hadith where the Prophet said, an-naru, an-naru darakat wal jannatu darajat, that the fire has darakat, which is, which is stations, but stations that go down towards hell, yeah, darakat. And wal jannatu darajat, and Jannah has darajat, which is the kind of a ladder upwards towards the highest stations in heaven. So just like there are stations in heaven, there are stations in hell. And he says whether you, if you're spiritually feel connected to God, you feel closer to God, meaning if you turn to God, let's say, if you turn to God, then you are in you're going to have daraja from it. You're going to be, you're climbing the ladder towards the spiritual ladder towards God. He said, but if you're becoming distant from God, disconnected from God, or you forget God, in other words, you're crying because you've lost something as if it was ever yours in the first place, and no point does God feature in this, and you don't have, there's no sense of shukr or gratitude that you ever had this thing in your life, wherever it may be. He says, "Fala darak," and he said, and this is you climbing down this ladder towards, away from heaven. And the next verse in Surah Mulk, then, so Subhanalladhi, Tabarakalladhi biyadihi al-mulku wa huwa ala kulli shay'in qadir. Yeah, alladhi khalaqa al-mawta wal hayata liyabluwakum ayyukum ahsanu amala. So actually, all of these last two couplets are very closely related to this, the first two lines or two ayat of Surah Mulk, because Allah says, "Alladhi khalaqa al-mawta," it was He who created death, wal hayata, and life itself. So mahya, He uses mahya, and Allah here talks about death and life, and you can take this to mean spiritual death and life too. لِيَبْلُوَكُمْ أَيُّكُمْ أَحْسَنُ أَمَلًا, so that Allah can test us. He can test us through affliction. If you take the verse of Surah Baqarah, yeah, وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ, and we will certainly test you with these things, with fear of loss of wealth and food and so on. أَيُّكُمْ أَحْسَنُ أَمَلًا, to test which of you is best in action, which of you, when the times get tough, which of you turns to God. وَهُوَ الْعَزِيزُ الْغَفُورُ, and Allah refers to Himself by these two names. And there's a real power in the choice of God, the choice of names that God uses for Himself at the beginning and end of each verse. And some of the scholars even spoke about how the center of all the surahs is actually the name of God that Allah uses for Himself, because that indicates the tone of the verse. So here Allah refers to Himself as Al-Aziz. Al-Aziz is Dhul Izzah, the one who is of the highest, rank, most noble, the one who gives Izzah, the one who gives us, rank. Al-Ghafur, but also the one who is most forgiving. So it's mentioned these two things. One is, if God created life and death, He created all of this to test us, and part of that test is hardship, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who elevates us when we're in that hardship. That's why He's Al-Aziz. And the other thing He is Al-Ghafur, as per the hadith, that when we go through these hardships, then God begins to expiate our sins. So that's why God uses these two names, Al-Azizu wal-Ghafur, because Allah raises us in Izzah when we cope, when we try to cope, and He also, subhanahu wa ta'ala, He gives us, He forgives us. Yeah, I'll just mention, so there's one hadith which I want to actually quote, and I'll leave you with this. Sayyidina Abu Sa'id al-Khudri radiallahu anhu narrates this, and it's found in Sahih Bukhari. He said, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, he says, وَمَنْ يَتَصَبَّرْ يُصَبِّرُهُ اللَّهُ وَمَنْ يَتَصَبَّرْ يُصَبِّرُهُ اللَّهُ. So this couplet is on purpose. وَنُزُولُهُمُ وَطُلُوعُهُمُ فَعَلَى دَرَكٍ وَعَلَى دَرَجِ. And as I said, this second verse of Surah Mulk is relevant here. الَّذِي خَلَقَ الْمَوْتَ وَالْحَيَاةَ. This idea that Our, our rank is raised or brought down by how we manage tribulation or just manage through life's ebbs and flows. And this hadith is a really powerful hadith for me. وَمَنْ يَتَصَبَّرْ يُصَبِّرُهُ اللَّهُ. That whoever endeavors to be patient, we all fail. Right? Whoever endeavors to be patient, you just try, or at least you have it in your heart that you want to be patient. The hadith in Sahih Bukhari tells us Allah will make you patient. Allah will give you patience. So try, and God will make you of the patient. وَمَا أُعْتِيَ أَحَدٌ عَطَاءً خَيْرًا وَأَوْسَعَ مِنَ الصَّبْرِ. And then the Prophet ﷺ said, there is no gift that God has given that's greater than giving you the gift of patience. In other words, when we try and we fail, the act of trying means God gives it. God gives it though as a gift, and the Prophet tells us that there's no gift that God gives that's greater than the gift of patience. And there's a verse where in Surah Al-Imran, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, الذين ينفقون في السراء والضراء والكاظمين الغيظ والعافين عن الناس والله يحب المحسنين. Which is so in this surah, in this verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, He says, those who give in times of ease and in times of difficulty. So when the hardship is financial, Allah says, those who give in times of ease and in times of difficulty. And then He says, and those who hold back their anger. So when you are feeling, that itself is a calamity, a hardship. When you're feeling angry, so that could be where somebody has a bad relationship with their parents or with their siblings, or has a bad relationship with some of their close friends, or anyone where there's a kind of a destructive pattern that leads to a lot of anger and resentment. And the Quran uses the word kazima, and actually there's in the Burda, those of you who are familiar with the Burda will know that this is also a word that's used in the Burda. وَأَوْمَضَ الرِّيحُ مِنْ تِلْقَاءِ كَاظِمَةٍ وَأَوْمَضَ الْبَرْقُ فِي الظَّلْمَاءِ كَاظِمَةٍ. Or is it the lightning that strikes and illuminates the sky over Al-Kazima? Kazima was one of the names of Madinatul Munawwara, and it was called Al-Kazima because when people went there, they felt at peace. It was the thing that it was the place that settled hearts, and where you didn't feel that sense of anger or agitation. Right? It was agitation. The Quran speaks highly of people who are able to absorb that anger, to not absorb it, to diffuse that anger. It's not just about holding anger in, right? That's not a good thing, right? Holding anger in is not a good thing. It's diffusing that anger, internally diffusing it, meaning rather than being angry, not just not show anger, but to actually try to diffuse it inside. Why am I feeling angry? Try to process it appropriately. And shouting at somebody or swearing at somebody or these things never diffuse anger. All they do is just make you even angrier. So there has to be a proper process of how you get that anger to actually slowly go away, to diffuse. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks of these people and says, وَالْكَاظِمِينَ الْغَيْظَ, and those who diffuse their anger. And finally, Allah says, وَالْعَافِينَ عَنِ النَّاسِ, and those who are the overlook, those who overlook, those who overlook. And again, that's relevant here because you overlook when you have been judged or somebody has been unjust to you. Yeah? If someone's judged you, said something about you that you feel like wasn't right, and you want to respond, react, or someone does something unjust to you, right? Hurts you, or does something that would tarnish your reputation, defame you, anything. That itself is quite a big hardship in a digital age. That's extremely difficult. If someone puts something out on the internet about you, someone says something without knowing much about you, just makes one sweeping statement, and it might be okay for them, but actually the thing that you've got to remember when you're on the internet, what we've got to think about is in 300 years time, maybe the only memory our grandchildren, great grandchildren will have of us is what they see on the internet. what they see on the internet is these random statements about you. Well, that's a judgment that they may make have of you. So it's extremely easy to become very resentful and angry if someone was to say, a friend was to say something and make it public, or say amongst your friends, or perhaps even put it on the internet. um, so the Quran talks about each of these groups of people, each of them suffering through some hardship but overcoming it. Right? Each of them overcoming it, overcoming your anger, overcoming your sense of being, receiving, being the recipient of some sort of injustice, or somebody who is in an extreme sense of hardship but turns to God and still gives financially, gives in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All of these people, Allah refers to them. He says, Wallahu yuhibbul muhsinin. He says that Allah loves those who are people of ihsan. So actually, by coping with the hardship, by absorbing it and diffusing it, right, and doing something about it, and maybe even failing, but at least trying. In all these cases, what we learn is the test from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that we will go through hardships, and that the what we should be trying to do is to turn to God and to be patient, and that in trying to be patient we may fail, but yet in the attempt God will make us patient. He will give us that gift, inshallah, if we keep trying. And that if we are successful and we manage to get through that through the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Allah counts us amongst those who are people of ihsan, people are the muhsinin. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq to be amongst the muhsinin. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. So we will leave it there. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.